Hi, it's Miss Dubas here, and welcome to Lesson 11 of the Climatic Hazards Unit. Please make sure that you've got a pen to write with, a piece of paper, and a different colour pen so that you can mark your work. Also, make sure that you're working somewhere nice and quiet and free of distraction so that you can focus on your work and your learning. So whenever you're ready, we can get started. So the focus of this lesson is on the Somerset Floods 2013 to 14. The focus is on the impacts and the management of this extreme event. However, there is a first lesson that links to this, which was all about the location and the causes of this event. So it's really worthwhile looking at that lesson first before moving on to this lesson. So we're first going to have a little reminder about the location and causes of the flood event linked to an extreme weather event. So the Somerset Floods occurred in the Somerset Levels, a low-lying area of the UK. And this area is located southwest of the UK. You can see the Somerset Levels in the photograph on the screen, but you can also see the location of the Somerset Levels to the right of the screen through the two maps. If you'd like to pause the video at this point to study the photograph and the maps, that is absolutely fine. So let's remind ourselves about the location and the causes of this particular event and some of the facts and figures linked to this. So on the screen, you will see 6 answers to questions. I would like you to pause the video and create a question to go with each answer. Then I'd like you to resume when you are ready to mark your work, and we can see if the questions you've come up with are the correct questions that link to each of these answers. So we're now ready to mark our work. So please make sure that you've got a different coloured pen so that you're able to do this. If you've got the answer correct, please give yourself a big tick. And if you need to make any corrections, that's absolutely fine. So the answer that you had for question 1 was Southwest England. The question was, where is Somerset located within England? The answer you had for question 2 was 3 times more. And the question is, Somerset received how many more times the average rainfall between December 2013 and February 2014? The answer you had for number 3 was infiltration. So infiltration is when water seeps into soil. The question was, what reduces if soil becomes saturated or surfaces become impermeable? So saturated means full of water, and impermeable means the surfaces do not allow water to flow through them. So for example, because concrete or tarmac has been introduced into the area. The answer you had to number 4 was surface runoff. And the question is, what increases if soil becomes saturated or surfaces become impermeable? The answer you had to number 5 was high tides and storm surges. And the question is, what prevented river discharge from flowing into the Bristol Channel? And the answer you had to number 6 was 20 years. And the question was, how many years had it been since dredging had occurred in the Somerset Levels? So the Somerset Levels flooded due to a combination of factors, so due to a combination of physical and human factors. So firstly, heavy rainfall caused by extreme weather saturated the soil. This reduced infiltration and increased surface runoff, and this caused the rivers in the area to reach their bankful capacity faster and therefore flood. Secondly, high tides and storm surges prevented this excess river discharge or excess water from flowing freely out to sea, so it caused the water to back up, contributing towards the flood. However, humans also contributed towards the flood event. The rivers had not been dredged for 20 years, and this reduced their ability to hold water. Also, humans had influenced or affected the drainage basins by creating more impermeable surfaces by building in the areas. So again, this increased the flood risk. So there are many causes of this particular flooding event, and some of that is linked directly to the extreme weather, and some of that is linked to human activity. If you need to review any of these causes again, it's really worth looking back to the first lesson about the Somerset level flooding so that you can really understand, first of all, where Somerset and the Somerset Levels are located, but also what caused this event to take place in the first place. So now that we've been reminded about the location and causes of the flood event in Somerset, we're now ready to consider the effects. So on your screen, you will see a photograph of flooding in the Somerset levels in an area called Boroughbridge. Before I reveal to you the specific effects of flooding during the Somerset floods, I would like you to predict what you think will be on the list. So using the photograph and your own knowledge, predict a list of at least 5 effects of this flood event. One example might be that houses could be flooded. So please pause the video to complete the task, and then when you're ready, resume the video so that we can mark your work and I can reveal to you the list of effects that this flood caused for this area. So we're now ready to mark our work. So please make sure that you're using a different colour pen in order to do this. Please make sure you tick any effects that you have correctly predicted and that you add in any additional notes that you need. So I'm going to share with you 8 very specific facts about the effects of the flooding in this area, because as geographers, we need to ensure that our case study examples are detailed. So please ensure that you add in the specific details to your notes, so any numbers or any specific pieces of information that I give you. You may have other predictions that I haven't included here, and that is absolutely fine. So let's have a look at some of the effects of this flooding event. So the first one is that 600 homes were damaged. So you may have written down that homes were damaged, but you may need to add in the 600 so that you can make your notes specific. Number 2, the cost of damage was approximately £80 million. So again, make sure that you've got in the £80 million as the specific fact. Number 3, 14,000 hectares of farmland was flooded for 3 to 4 weeks, damaging crops. Number 4, roads such as the A361 were closed. 5, some people could not get insurance for their house after the flood. 6, villages such as Moorland were only accessible by boat. 7, £200 million from tourism was lost. And finally, standing water became stagnant and affected the soil fertility. So if you need to pause the video at this point just to update your notes to make sure you've got those specific facts in, that is absolutely fine, but make sure that you do tick any that you've got correct. So I mentioned that the village of Moorland was only accessible by boat during this flood. The OS map and the aerial photograph here highlight how close Moorland is to the river, but also how low-lying the land is in and around this village. So now that we have 8 specific effects linked to the flood event, we're going to consider them further. So I would like you to now undertake an activity to categorise the effects into social, economic and environmental effects. So a social effect is anything that has an impact on the lives of people. An economic effect is anything that has an impact on the wealth of the area. And an environmental effect is anything that has an impact on the landscape and the ecology, including water of the area. So you have got your 8 facts here. I would like you to categorise them into these 3 categories. You might find that some of the effects fall into more than one category, and that's absolutely fine. You might decide to colour code your effects, or you might group them, or you might decide to write next to them which category they fall into. So I'd like to pause the video at this point to have a go at the activity, and then when you're ready to mark your work, please resume the video so we can check your answers. So we're now ready to mark our work, so please make sure that you have a different colour pen to do this. Make sure that you tick any correct answers and that you add in any corrections if you need to. So let's take a look at each of these 8 effects and think about which category they fall into. So number 1, 600 homes were damaged, social and economic. Social, because people may lose their belongings, and the situation does cause worry and anxiety. And economic, because it can be very expensive to repair the damage. Number 2, the cost of damage was approximately £80 million. This is economic. Number 3, 14,000 hectares of farmland was flooded for 3 to 4 weeks, damaging crops. So this would be social, economic, and environmental. Social because it can affect food supplies. Economic, because farmers can no longer sell their crops for income. And environmental, because the physical plant itself is damaged and the soil quality can be affected. Number 4. Roads such as the A361 were closed. So this is social and economic. It's social because it prevents people accessing schools and work and other places that they need to be. And it's economic because it also makes it very difficult for businesses to function. Number 5. Some people could not get insurance for their house after the flood. So this would be social and economic. And this is because people may struggle to sell their homes. This also can be quite a worrying situation for people. Number 6. Villages such as Moorland were only accessible by boat. This is a huge social issue because people's daily lives are significantly disrupted. Number 7. £200 million from tourism was lost. This would be social and economic. It's social because less people were able to visit and enjoy the area, but also economic because there's been a loss of tourist income to the area, and this also can affect jobs. And number 8, standing water becomes stagnant and affected the soil fertility. So stagnant water can smell unpleasant, and if it affects the soil fertility, this can affect future plant growth. So make sure that you check your answers and make sure that you've added in any additional notes that you need. So it's now time to make a decision. So you have a decision to make about these effects that we've just been studying. So which of these effects is the most significant and why? Now, most significant could mean the one that's the worst, the one that's the most long-lasting, the one that has the biggest effect on people or the economy or the environment. It is up to you to make that decision. So which of these effects do you think is the most significant and why? So I would like you to make your decision and provide at least 2 reasons for your decision. So you may just write this up in a couple of sentences. So please pause the video at this point to complete the activity and then resume once you're ready to mark your work. So we're now ready to mark our work. So the example that I've given is just one example. It's just the one that I've chosen, but you may have chosen a different effect to be the most significant, and that is absolutely fine. The most important thing is that you have justified your choice and that you've explained why you've chosen that particular effect to be the most significant. So providing at least 2 reasons. So the one that I chose was 14,000 hectares of farmland was flooded for 3 to 4 weeks, damaging crops. And this is my reasoning. This effect is the most significant because it has further social, economic and environmental impacts. Floodwater has damaged crops, which can no longer be sold for profit. This also affects local food supplies. In addition to this, the floodwater became stagnant and affected the fertility of the soil, which also means this effect is long-term. So that was my reasoning. So what I would like you to do is to check your answer just to make sure that you have really given valid reasons as to why the effect that you've chosen is the most significant. So have you given at least 2 reasons why within your answer? If you would like to pause the video at this point so that you can redraft your answer and to improve it and to adjust what you've written, that is absolutely fine. So now that we've studied the effects of the flood event, we're now going to consider how the flood event was managed or dealt with. Don't forget, there were several reasons why the flood event happened in the first place. So for example, an extreme weather event during the winter of 2013 to 2014 brought 3 times more rainfall than average to the area alongside storm surges. These were the physical causes of this flood event. However, human activity also contributed towards the flooding. A lack of dredging reduced the channel capacity of the rivers in the Somerset levels, causing them to reach bank full capacity faster and flood. Also, the urban areas surrounding the rivers reduced infiltration and increased surface runoff, causing the additional rainfall to reach the rivers in a shorter time frame. This also contributed towards the flooding. So the causes were a complex combination of different factors. So how was this flood event dealt with immediately, but also in the longer term? So the immediate responses of this event were the actions taken as soon as the extreme weather conditions were forecast and flooding in the Somerset levels was predicted. So what were those responses? So firstly, the Met Office issued a warning, a weather warning, that extreme weather was on the way. There was a prediction that there was going to be a high amount of rainfall, which therefore could lead to a flood. This allowed people to prepare and get ready for the flooding. Residents were moved to emergency accommodation in certain areas of the Somerset levels, and this reduced the risk to life. Sandbags and floodboards were used to protect buildings, so this would reduce damage to the properties themselves and reduce the loss of personal belongings. This does, of course, reduce the cost of repair overall. Boats were used to access essential services such as medical care. Volunteer groups were set up to ensure that the communities looked after each other. And pumping stations were set up to pump water back into the rivers, so there were 65 of them. And you can see an example of one of those in the image on the screen. And this was hopefully helping to remove the floodwater as quickly as possible so that the cleanup could begin. So let's just think about this question. Why was pre-warning so important? So being given a warning that this extreme event was going to take place, which could lead to a flood, allowed people to prepare, and that allowed people to calmly respond and deal with the situation. So let's now consider the longer-term responses to the extreme weather event, which led to the flooding. So we cannot prevent potential future extreme weather events bringing excess rain to the Somerset levels. So we have to think about how to reduce the chance that the rivers will flood in response to this additional rain. And we have to think about how to reduce the effects of flooding if the rivers did exceed their bank full capacity. So the Somerset Levels and Moors Flood Action Plan has been put in place. It's a 20-year plan costing £100 million. So the aim is to make temporary pumping stations permanent, so if there is a flood in the future, work can start immediately to remove the floodwater from the area, reducing the overall effects. There are also plans to raise road levels in some areas. This would mean access routes would not be cut off if a flood occurred. People could still access schools, medical care and jobs, and could be rescued more easily if needed. There's also a plan to build a tidal barrage at Bridgewater across the River Parrett. This would hold back the highest tides, which could reduce the chance of a flood. Finally, dredging of the River Tone and River Parrett will take place. These rivers hadn't been dredged for over 20 years before this flood event, reducing their capacity to hold the additional discharge. This can be seen in image 1 below. When the extreme weather event occurred, bringing heavy rainfall, the rivers reached bank full capacity faster, which led to the flood. We can see this in image 2 below. However, if rivers are dredged, this could mean diggers or pumps can be used to remove silt from the river channel to build up the river banks, increasing the river capacity. This would mean that rivers can hold more discharge, which therefore reduces the chance of a flood occurring in the first place. So dredging could be a really important key strategy to reduce the floods in the future. So we're now going to apply our understanding of responses to a question. So using a named example, explain the immediate and long-term responses to an extreme weather event. 6 marks. So because it's 6 marks, we need to write about 2 responses, one immediate and one long-term. So our named example is the Somerset Floods 2013 to 2014. And you need to decide for your immediate response if you're going to write about the Met Office warning or the pumping stations. For your long-term response, you need to decide if you're going to write about the dredging or raising road levels. When you write about your immediate and your long-term response, make sure you say what they are, but then fully develop your points to clearly explain how each strategy works to reduce the flood risk. You need to make sure that you use specific case study facts and figures in your writing as well. So that shows that you understand the named example. So have a look at the model answer at the bottom of the screen to help you structure your work. So one immediate response was that residents were moved to emergency accommodation on the advice of the Met Office. This meant they were moved away from houses at risk of flooding, which led to less people being left stranded in their homes. So notice how I have double developed the point so I can really clearly explain how the strategy works to reduce the flood risk. So please pause the video at this point so that you can write your answer and then resume when you are ready to mark your work. So we're now ready to mark your work. So please make sure that you've got a different colour pen in order for you to do that. If you have included something that I've included in the model answer, give it a big tick, but also make sure that you add in any additional notes that you need. And if you want to, you can pause the video and redraft and rewrite your answer if you want to make any significant improvements. So let's have a look at this answer. One immediate response to the Somerset Floods 2013 to 2014 was a warning issued by the Met Office prior to the extreme event, 1 mark. This meant that local residents could protect their homes using sandbags and floodboards, 1 mark. This led to a reduction in the risk to housing, which reduced the overall cost of the flood event, 1 mark. One long-term response to the Somerset Floods 2013 to 2014 was regular dredging as part of the Somerset Levels and Moors Flood Action Plan. Dredging in rivers such as the River Tone involves removing the buildup of silt in the river channel, 1 mark. This leads to increased river capacity, meaning more river discharge can be contained within the channel, 1 mark. Therefore, the river is less likely to reach its bankfall capacity and flood, reducing the flood risk, 1 mark. So we're now to the end of our lesson today about the impacts and management of the Somerset Floods 2013-2014. Well done for all your hard work today. Please make sure that you complete the exit quiz so you can make sure that you've understood the key points from today. You might also decide to summarise the 3 key ideas that you've learned from the lesson today. Thank you very much for joining me. Take care.